My name is Sarah May. I am here to talk to you about men. But I find gender a very difficult subject to talk about. I do a lot of conference talks. Most of them are 40 minutes, some are 30 minutes. This one's 20 minutes, which sounds like it should be easier. But this is easily the hardest talk that I've written in the last 2 years. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. This is me on all the important places on the internet, which for my purposes is Twitter and GitHub. I'm a developer. I do a lot of Ruby. I do a lot of JavaScript. I do a little bit of other stuff as well. I am what the kids today call a full stack web developer, which in practice means I write a Backbone.js app, and I write the API that the Backbone.js app consumes, and I write the data crunching code that the API draws from, and I write the ETLs that get the data that the data crunchers crunch. I think you get the idea, right? Turtles all the way down. So I've been writing code for money since 1998, and I worked at a lot of product companies of different sizes, but for the last 4 years I've been doing software consulting. Most of that time I was at a company called Pivotal Labs. I actually just left Pivotal, now I run my own consulting shop, Ministry of Velocity. The awesome thing about running your own company is you get to name it whatever you want. I love it. We call it Minifast. Any George Orwell fans in the audience? Like, I think you guys get that, maybe no one else does. Anyway, so working as a software consultant is an interesting way to work. The way Pivotal does it, which is also the way we do it at Minifast, is that developers who work for the client company come in and pair program with developers who work for the consulting shop. And so the consultant engineers and the client engineers build the project together as an integrated piece of the client's engineering team. So a typical project runs like 3 to 6 months, right? Sometimes shorter, sometimes significantly shorter. So what that means is that in the last 4 years, I've spent anywhere from a few weeks to a few months at a time inside over a dozen different engineering organizations. And as a result, I've seen a lot of different ways that you can organize developers to write code. And a lot of the conference talks I've been doing over the last year, including this one, have come out of that experience of seeing so many different ways to get it right and so many fascinating ways to get it wrong. When I'm not working, I do a decent amount of work to fix this gender gap that we all experience in programming. One thing I do every summer is I volunteer at a program called Get Set. Anyone ever heard of this program? Yay, okay, a few people. It's run by the Society of Women Engineers down here in like the Santa Clara, San Jose area, and it's a week-long sleepaway summer camp for high school girls from underrepresented minorities. And the girls come for 4 years, same group of girls every time while they're in high school. And they take classes in all different kinds of engineering and science. And I teach the programming class, which incoming juniors take. We build a little paint application using Shoes, which is like a UI toolkit for Ruby. Now, the goal of the program is to get these girls to go to college and to get them to major in some kind of science, engineering, technology kind of deal. You should check it out. They have a terrible website. Don't even bother Googling it. It's so terrible. But the program itself is very effective. It's free for the girls involved, and they always need donations and more volunteer support. And I've also been working to improve the communities that are closer to where I actually work, right? Getting more girls into programming is a long-term effort. So in 2009, I co-founded a nonprofit called RailsBridge that works on a more short-term version of this problem. Basically what we do is we put on free 2-day workshops for women who want to learn Ruby and Ruby on Rails. Anyone ever been to a RailsBridge workshop? A few people, all right, awesome. Anyone ever volunteered as a teacher? Yes, okay, 1, hooray. So, if you're at all interested in Ruby or Ruby on Rails, you should check it out. Railsbridge.org. If you know any Ruby or Rails, even a little bit, you should also check it out to volunteer and help other women learn what you know. So we do these workshops a couple times a month in San Francisco, which is where I'm based. Although this photo is actually from one we just did in New York. We've expanded to other places. We've done over 100 events on 6 different continents. And I'm basically waiting for someone to organize the Antarctic RubyConf so I can get continent number 7. Yeah, it'll happen someday, right? But we've concentrated in San Francisco, both because that's where our volunteer base is, and because that's where companies that use Ruby are based, many of them. And they're the ones that sponsor the events and make it free for attendees. And for the last 4 years in San Francisco, as we've done all of these workshops, our Ruby meetups have undergone an interesting transformation. They've gone from about 3 to 5% women to about 15 to 20% women at any given meetup, which is pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. It's certainly not parity, right? It's not 50-50. but most open source communities, of which Ruby is one, hang out at about 3% women. So by that standard, 15 to 20% is doing okay. We're doing okay. There's more work to do. Once in a while, people ask me, though, why do you care about this stuff, right? Why do you care about getting more women into the Ruby community, and why do you care about getting more girls into programming in general? And if I'm feeling charitable, I think it's a fair question. Sometimes I'm not feeling charitable. But the answer for me is twofold. The first part is selfish. The first part is that I love this stuff so much. I love programming. I love building stuff. And I want to go to meetups, but I don't want to be the only woman there. So for me, it's partially about feeling less alien on my own turf, right? When I go to a Ruby meetup, I don't want to feel like I am visually distinct from everyone else in the room. And the second part of the answer is that software is capable of solving some really important and difficult problems, right? And science tells us that diverse teams are better at solving problems than non-diverse teams. And that is true even if the diverse team is less qualified on paper than the non-diverse team. The theory is that having to interact with people who are not like you puts your brain into a more creative mode and leads the group to better outcomes. So with diverse teams, we as an industry could do a lot more. Because I don't need any more grocery delivery services. I don't need any more ways to hail a cab. I don't need anyone else mining my social graph. I want to see software tackle hunger and poverty and violence. And we can. It's a hard problem. It's going to take bringing people into programming, all sorts of people that aren't there right now. But my little piece of that is bringing in more women, because that's what I know how to do. Because I want us to do more. So that's why I care, big picture. But this is still a very hard conversation to have. And the big danger here is overgeneralization. Everyone has their own experience of gender as an engineer. And it's human nature for us to overgeneralize from our own experiences, but in doing so, we sometimes unintentionally alienate people whose experience is different. So that's why I call this my incomplete and mostly wrong guide, because if you work in a big company or you don't work in open source, these experiences may not feel truthy to you. I'll give you an example from the other direction. I heard a talk once from a woman developer at Google, which was a great talk. Her advice on how to have more impact in your work was two things. She said, first, when you're at a meeting, sit at the table. And second, when there's an important email thread, make sure you contribute so your voice is heard. And I had to ask her what she meant by those things. They didn't really make sense to her. Here's what she explained this to me by showing me a picture like this. Basically, she said, when you have these big coordination meetings, there's a big table in the middle, and then there's like overflow seating around the room, right? And so her advice was like, sit at the table so that instead of in the overflow seating, so that you're more involved, people see you being more involved, people will take you more seriously. And I realized that, at the companies that I work with, this makes no sense at all, right? Because we are not big enough to require that level of coordination. We don't do those meetings. We don't even have a conference room this big. And all the coordination we need to do can be done ad hoc and in person. Same with email, right? Small companies tend to not have a culture of email because you can just turn around and talk to people and it's much more efficient. And there are small companies that have meeting and email-centric cultures. It's a pro tip. This is because they're usually run by people that used to work at big companies and they haven't figured out how to slim down yet. Which, by the way, means there's a market opportunity there, right? So, her advice was she meant it from the heart and it was a good talk, but it just really didn't apply to anything in my life. So keep in mind that when I'm talking about this stuff, I am generalizing from a wide range of small companies in open source software. So these tactics may or may not apply at the scale of where you guys work. So that covers incomplete and mostly wrong. What about this part? I call this the guide to working with men because I want to talk about gender in the context of having greater impact with the work that we do. Impact comes at different levels, right? There's impact with your team, getting your sort of technical and architecture ideas heard and implemented. There's impact in your company, getting engineering ideas heard by non-engineers, and there's impact within your community, which is getting your ideas heard outside the company in the communities around the frameworks and languages that you use. So let's talk about impact at the team and company level first. What I care about, the reason that I'm here in this industry doing this work, is to write great software that solves real problems. I want my work to have an impact. I want to be effective, and I want to ship useful code as often as possible. Now, at the scale of an individual team, that requires more than anything else cooperation and empathy. Because producing good code on a team is largely a function of your team's communication structure. I did a whole talk on this last year at RubyConf that you can find online, but the short version is that Carnegie Mellon in 2008 found that good communication was the strongest indicator of good code from a team. Good communication was a stronger indicator than developers' familiarity with the code or their experience with the technology. And this science matches up with my experience with these different teams. Teams that talk to each other more are more successful. Teams that isolate their developers are less successful. Now, success in this context means that they produce the right product. Isolated developers may generate way more volume of code, but if they don't talk to other people, they're probably building the wrong thing. So if you want to write better code, and you want to have the code you write be used and be useful, focus on improving your team's communication. Now, you can do that as an individual. On a team, it's interesting, right? If you think of people as the vertices and the communication structure as its edges, right? It's the structure and number of those edges that determine whether you as a group are successful. Just for example, right, you're looking at a network topology graph, it's the connections that are the interesting part and not the machines that they connect, right? So given that we work mostly with men, and given that having a bigger impact at the team level means improving communication, the question I'm interested in is how can I use my understanding of gender to write more good code and make a bigger impact on my team? So step 0, because we always number things from 0, right? Step 0 is to get past your archetypes. We are all individual human beings with our own experiences of our body and our presentation and our personality. There's a wide range of genders up there. I love to put this particular diagram up. It's called the gender-bred person. And it explains all the different ways that we experience gender in ourselves and in other people, and all the different axes along which it can vary. So at the top, we have gender identity, which is how you in your head think about yourself. It's the chemistry that composes you and how you interpret what that means. Gender expression underneath, how you demonstrate your gender based on traditional gender roles through the ways that you act, dress, behave, and interact. Biological sex, the objectively measurable organs, hormones, and chromosomes. And finally, sexual orientation, who you are attracted to physically, spiritually, and emotionally based on their sex or gender in relation to your own. These axes can vary independently. So even among people whose gender presentation is masculine, there's a wide range of gender identities, orientation, and sexes that don't necessarily track that gender presentation. Now, this is not just a crazy San Francisco thing, like, Beta Breakers or something. This is actually a much more scientifically accurate portrayal of gender, and it's gaining traction in lots of different corners of the world. Now, from a practical standpoint, what I can tell you with my experience with Railsbridge and the San Francisco Ruby meetup is that once we had more women coming to the meetups, we also got a lot more gender variant men. So somewhat paradoxically, by bringing in more women, we also brought in more gay men. We also brought in more transgender people. We enlarged and diversified the community in lots of ways we did not expect. The community itself became livelier and more creative. It's today still the most active Ruby meetup in the world, and has over 7,000 people on the mailing list. So day to day, I see a decent amount of gender diversity, even among the men who make up the engineering teams that I work with. But the majority of people I work with, and I wager the majority of people you work with, are still masculine presenting and male identified. We can call that group men for short. But having a more nuanced understanding of gender gives these men space to be themselves as well. Lots of men will tell you that they hate having to pretend to enjoy sports, for example. I had a friend who used to watch SportsCenter every night, not because he cared, but because the place that he worked had a very sports-oriented sort of small talk culture. And he felt like he needed to do that in order to fit in. Getting past these stereotypes means you're communicating better and having more authentic interactions with your coworkers, and communicating better as a group means you write better code. So that's step 0. Step 1 is to just show up. Like Jennifer said, just being there as the person you are is important, and it inspires people. Come to work every day as your authentic self, wherever you fall on those gender axes. Your presence alone makes the group more creative, better problem solvers. Step 2 is to expect change, both in yourself and in the people you work with. When I started working at Pivotal, for a while I was their only female engineer out of about 40 people, and it's a very developer-centric culture. So there weren't many women there at all, in any role. I had been at Pivotal about 8 months when they sent me to an off-site project, which is a little unusual. It meant I went to the client's office a few blocks away instead of the client coming to our office. And at this client company, there were women. Quite a few of them, actually, in different roles. Some of them were fairly feminine in their presentation. Now, I was at the client office every day for 3 months, and then I came back to the Pivotal office, where just as before, there weren't really any other women. And I realized that in the 3 months I was at the client's office, I had stopped wearing pants. Not that okay, that didn't come out right. I had started wearing more dresses, right? And heels even sometimes, right? These things felt good. I realized over the 8 months I had been at the Pivotal office, I had slowly stopped doing all of those things. I had stopped wearing makeup, I stopped wearing heels, not on purpose, and not all at once, but just sort of gradually. And my uniform had become jeans and geeky t-shirt and sneakers, which coincidentally was exactly like all of the guys around me. And some people love that uniform, but that uniform is not me. And from that day on, after I realized this, I started deliberately wearing more dresses and skirts to work, even though I was the only one doing it. And then one day I came in, and one of my coworkers, a man, was wearing a skirt. And he looked at me and he's like, well, you were doing it, so I like skirts. And by being different, I had given him tacit permission to also be different, right? And in doing so, I increased the visual diversity of the team. And from then on, we actually saw a much larger range of clothing on everyone, including the men, and the office felt more creative. And I don't think it was a coincidence that after that, it felt easier to attract and hire women and gender-variant men into the engineering team. So that's step 2. Step 3, just keep showing up. I know you think we covered this, but we didn't. So impact. Impact is a funny thing, right? It's a funny word. It sounds like something that happens all at once. Impact. But when it comes to a code base, impact looks more like small commits over time. So show up every day, write some code, talk about the code you write, show it to people, tell people why you did things, talk some more, seek their suggestions. Over time, socializing your code is how you have impact. So that's what it looks like at the team level. Let's talk about what this looks like at the community level. It turns out, it's pretty much the same damn stuff, right? Treat people as individuals instead of archetypes. Show up as your authentic self and demonstrate for people that you're there. Expect change both in yourself and in the community that you're working with. And always have a pull request open. Because it turns out that impact at the community level is the same accumulation of sustained effort and small changes over time. Anybody in here a Ruby developer? All right, a few of you. The Ruby programming language was created by this man, Yukihiro Matsumoto, known as Mats, and it was created in Japan about the same time that Java was created here. And you can go and read the Ruby creation story on this Wikipedia page, and you might think, reading that it just kind of appeared, a work of genius. He had this idea for a new scripting language, and he just wrote it. Amazing, impact. But a few years ago, at a conference in Singapore, Mats and I, this is a long story that I'm not going to tell the whole thing, ended up on a walking tour of the city together. And in between admiring their very lovely gum-free sidewalks and beautiful tall buildings, I asked him how he came up with the idea to build the Ruby programming language. What was the inspiration? And he said, well, in my job, I had to write C. And I didn't like C. So I started to make my own improvements. I wrote little macros so that I could write C code the way I thought it should be done. And so after making these additions for 5 or 6 years, I had a summer where my company didn't really have anything for me to do. So I decided that it was time for me to graduate my set of C macros up into its own language. And that's what became Ruby. And I thought, even Ruby, which for all of its written history looks like a bolt from the blue. You know, Mats goes into a cave and he merges with his work of genius for everyone to enjoy. Even that was really just the slow accumulation of improvements over time. And that's how I think about Railsbridge. Every time we do a workshop, 30 to 50 students show up. And of that group, I will feel successful if one of them comes back to a meetup someday. The key to success is just to do it and to keep doing it. And that one person here and one person there adds up over time. Changing the ratio ourselves is a slow and sustainable way to parity. And we can do it. You're doing it right now by just showing up, by going to work and demonstrating for the world that the term software developer describes a wide range of people. So when you think about impact in your own career, realize that impact is nothing more or less than the slow accumulation of directed change over time. You can start doing it today. In fact, you've probably already been doing it for years. And pretty soon you'll have your own bolt from the blue, right? And people will look at it and they'll think, wow, she's such a genius. How does she make such an incredible impact in such a short period of time? And that's because they don't see the little changes over time. But I won't tell them if you won't. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So we have time for a couple of questions. Do we have any questions for Sarah?
It's going to be super awkward if there isn't at least one. Come on, you guys.
We do have a question. We have two. All right.
This is more of a comment. I volunteered for the first time at Get Set this year, and it's amazing, and I think more people should get involved because these kids are mind-blowing with what they're experimenting with and doing in these classes, so that's it.
I'll be around all day if you want contact info.
When is the next Railsbridge program in San Francisco, or how can you find out more?
Let's see, we just had one last weekend, so probably 2 weeks from now, or maybe, we're not super, how do you say, organized. And the reason that Railsbridge has been so successful is because we are essentially a leaderless organization. Anyone can pick up the Railsbridge curriculum, it's all published on GitHub, it's all open source, and anyone can do a workshop wherever they are with our set of recipes. And so oftentimes workshops will happen that I have no idea are going on. And sometimes people will be like, hey, I went to a Railsbridge workshop in Florida last weekend. And I'll be like, that's awesome. I had no idea that happened. That's great. That's great. We do have a calendar on our website, which is railsbridge.org. I think in San Francisco we're doing 2 a month-ish, but a lot of it depends on whether we can find organizers. Getting involved, by the way, as an organizer is a great way to figure out how it works and throw the workshop you want to see. Other questions? There's one right here.
So I'm interested in your career choice to be a consultant, and if that provides you with sort of flexibility that a lot of us are kind of seeking in the workplace. One of the things that scares me a little bit about going into, deeper into engineering departments is that it is 90% men, and the expectation is a little bit less sort of flexibility with time. So I was wondering if you could just touch on that.
So I have 2 kids. but I've never been the type of person that did where my job was my life. But now that I have kids, it's actually important, right? It was important before, but now other people are depending on me. I think one of the things that I liked about Pivotal when I worked there was that they had a very set schedule. Everyone shows up at 9 and everyone leaves at 6, which I thought I would hate. I thought I would hate not having that flexibility, but it turns out that if everyone leaves at 6, like, I'm done. I'm done at 6, right? Like 6:15, the office is a ghost town. No one expects me to check email after work. No one expects me to fix anything that breaks between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. And I loved that. I found that was, to me, provided way more true flexibility because it gave me all of my evening every day, rather than a more traditional engineering idea of flexibility, which is like you can go and do doctor's appointments and whatever, and it doesn't really matter when you come in, but we kind of expect you to always be on your email. And we kind of expect you to always, make sure that everyone gets, answers to the right things and that kind of stuff. So I found that there's room to expand our definitions of what flexibility really means. And now that I run my own company, I can do whatever I want, which is awesome too. Question in the front? Or are we? You could yell it at me and I could repeat it. All right. That does seem like a lot of work.
Hey, so I was really curious, how did you first learn code? Like, where did you get it? Was it something that you learned in the school system, or what happened?
I didn't really look at any code until I got to college. And then I wanted to build things. I knew I wanted to build things, but I thought I wanted to build physical things, like buildings at freeway overpasses and stuff, I don't know. And so I went in as a structural engineering major, but because of the way that I took my classes, I ended up having to take an elective programming class fairly early in the cycle. And I was like, this is awesome. This is way cooler than like figuring out the structural properties of concrete. Like, this is amazing. And the professor was like, well, this is a class on numerical methods in Fortran. If you like this, just wait till you try some of these other things you can do. And I was like, huh, okay. The other thing that happened at that same time was I did an internship at the National Space Institute, which is a research unit at UCSD. It was run by Sally Ride at the time. And I basically just wanted to work with Sally Ride. I didn't care what I was going to do, right? I just wanted to work with Sally Ride, because that's awesome, because she's an astronaut. And I used to have a poster of her in my room when I was a kid. So I showed up, and they were like, well, we're not really sure what we want you to do, but there is this thing. There's this new thing that is just, that just came out. It's the web. We've called it the web. There's this thing called a browser. This was right when that very first graphical browser was created. And they were like, well, we think we should have one of these sites on the web. And I was like, okay, what do you want to put on it? And they were like, well, over there is a closet. In that closet is a big stack of slide reels, like with physical slides on them. These are pictures that were taken by astronauts out the windows of the space program craft over the last 40 years. And they're sitting in those slide carousels. And what we'd like to do is put them on the web so that you can have a map and you can like click a location and it will like show you pictures that were taken near that location. Now, if I was doing this today, that's like a hack night project, right? Maybe. Once you scan all the slides in, right? That's trivial. It took us all summer. We wrote it as a CGI program in C. It took 3 of us, I think, 3 months to do it. I thought it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. But and then I went back to my normal classes and stuff. And then a couple months later, I got an email from a guy in Brazil. And he said, I just wanted to say thanks so much for this website. And I wanted to tell you that I am a climate researcher in Brazil. And I needed to convince my government that strip mining was still happening in the Brazilian rainforest. Clear cutting was still happening in the Brazilian rainforest, because they didn't believe me, right? And these places are very remote. You can't get out there to see. But I used your site to convince them, because what I did was I took 2 pictures of the same area that were taken 20 years apart, one on an Apollo mission and one on a space shuttle mission. And you could see the one with the space shuttle mission had these scars, visible scars of the clear cutting. And I took those photos that I found on your site and I put them in my report. And now the government believes me when I tell them the clear cutting is still happening. And I thought, wow, I did that. That's pretty awesome. I want to do more like that. That was a really long answer. Thank you very much.